The United Nations General Assembly voted against Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but India was not one of those countries. India abstained for the third time. I'm Barkha Dutt, you're with the Mojo Story. Our big focus today remains on the Indian response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Let's take a look at what we know thus far. India has abstained at the United Nations when the United Nations General Assembly passed a resolution deploring Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Although the Russians themselves have not used the word war, preferring to call it a military operation, it really is a war by any other name. This is India's third abstention in the past few days, leading to a big argument at home and at abroad. Western nations, of course, are urging India to take a clear stand, but Indians themselves are arguing among ourselves. Is India being pragmatic and guided by self-interest, or is India missing the moral moment? Does India need to finally get off that tightrope and take a clear position? Now, remember, there are thousands of Indian students that still need to be brought back home, and India has said that that remains our first priority. Let's introduce our guest today. Tavleen Singh, columnist and veteran journalist, is with us. Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, veteran diplomat, is with us. We're also joined by Ambassador Dilip Sinha, another former diplomat, and we're joined by Commodore Uday Bhaskar. Welcome, everybody, to the program. Ambassador Vishnu Prakash and Ambassador Sinha, I'd like to start by getting a diplomatic perspective, but if you permit me, I'll just get Tavleen in because I've been watching her Twitter timeline and she's been extremely critical of the position or the non-position that the government is taking. Tavleen, why are you critical? In some ways, this is classic Indian diplomacy. It's non-confrontational. India argues that more can be achieved by not confronting either side in public, by not taking a clear position, and above all, we've got Indian citizens to bring back home. So how can we at this point take an antagonistic position might be the argument.
Well, I think we should explain to our friends, the Russians, that yes, they have to help us bring the students back. But this is Gandhi's country. It's a country that is founded on the idea that when there's a moral issue, you try and take a side and hopefully take the right side. So here we have a country that is trying to be a democracy, that is trying to have a free market, that is trying to be different to what it was under the jackboot of the Soviet Union. And, frankly, should we not be on the side of that country? As far as I'm concerned, there must be other ways in which we can bring the students home. I think we left it too late. We didn't even warn them that this was going to happen. By the time that we did, it was too late. And, we must get them home whichever way we can. And if the Russians help, well and good. But as far as a moral stand, what is going to be left of India's respect in the world if in something so obvious as a little country being invaded by a massive country, that, we say, no, it's all right, we're on the fence?
But Tavleen, before I open this up for the panel, there is the memory of Iraq, and a country invaded on the back of dodgy weapons of mass destruction. The Western countries have been hypocritical, have they not?
Look, did America go into Iraq to occupy it, to take it over and absorb it and make it another state of the United States? No. They went in, as far as I'm concerned, I was totally against that war. But there were reasons why they went into Iraq, and there were reasons why they tried to stop communism in Vietnam. What is Russia's reason for going into Ukraine, bashing its cities to pulp, driving 1 million people now nearly, as refugees? What is the reason for this? What is the reason? Can you give me one?
Yeah, well, we've heard all sorts of bizarre sort of comments from the Russians, including ending sort of Nazism. The president, of course, Zelensky is a Jewish leader, but they speak about Nazi units. They're now speaking about nuclear war. Ambassador Prakash, are you comfortable with the kind of comments that we've seen from the Russian foreign minister, no less, talking loosely about World War III and how it will be nuclear and destructive? Do you believe that India's position has shifted fast and clearly enough? We have shifted, but not perhaps distinctly enough. What do you make of this third abstention?
Well, greetings, Barkha. First of all, what Russia has done is an invasion, is an aggression. There is no other word for that. So it is heart-wrenching to see the suffering that has been inflicted on Ukraine, whose only fault was that they dreamt of a future looking westwards outside the shadow of Russia. And the fact that they are on a geopolitical fault line is the reason, and they are paying the price. It is sad. India, as far as India is concerned, you know, there is a choice at looking at words and saying that certain word has not been used, or to look at the import of what India is doing. India is taking sides, and is taking sides of India, which is India's principal objective. And I salute India for standing up for India's interest and India's position. Now, what has India done? India has said in no uncertain terms that spilling of human blood is not the solution, that uh, the rule of law, international law has to be respected, that territorial integrity has to be respected, that cessation of hostility should be immediate, and so on and so forth. I think India has been very, very clear, and India's position has certainly evolved and will continue to evolve depending on the circumstances. So I don't think that there is any ambiguity. Every country tries to frame its position according to its enlightened self-interest. There are people who believe that what America does is freedom, upholding human rights. Some people have another viewpoint. I'm all for the closest of India-US relations, but it's also a fact that America has a Midas touch in reverse. So, well, if you want to justify it go ahead. But as far as I'm concerned, India is taking a stance which is principled, right, and correct.
Okay. The Americans, in fact, have issued a formal statement saying that they're working closely with the Indians. The Americans are urging India to take a clearer stand. You've got Ambassador Dilip Sinha, heavyweight diplomats like Richard Haas, who heads the Council on Foreign Relations, talking about how disappointing India's position is. Lisa Curtis, who worked in the Trump administration, says India has failed to show leadership. Obviously, the Americans are guided by their own interests, but there are many Indians who are asking, for example, why did India need to abstain even on a vote calling for an emergency session of the United Nations General Assembly? What do you think, Ambassador Sinha?
People who say that India's abstention is baffling. Let's leave aside all the moral arguments. Let us take the pure and simple, as Ambassador Vishnu Prakash mentioned, the issue of enlightened self-interest. Now, what is in our interest? We know that the Cold War has been there for some time now, this new Cold War. And now with Ukraine, we have an actual war taking place between Russia and Ukraine is being supported by the Western countries. So we are looking at a situation in which the West and Russia are at war, and this war is likely to continue for some time. In this situation, India has to see which side to take, because even India today depends upon Russia for its defense supplies. About 70% of our defense equipment has come from Russia. But can Russia maintain these defense supplies to India in the years and months and the years to come? Today, if you have noticed, a senior Air Force officer, Air Marshal Sandeep Singh, reassured India that Russia's defense supplies would not affect India significantly if they were disrupted, which means there is already a fear in our defense establishment that defense supplies from Russia will get impacted, and I am absolutely confident that they will be. There are reports that some of the critical equipment exported by Russia depend upon Western high-tech imports, and in any case, there'll be financial sanctions imposed as well. So we are looking at a situation where we will have to choose clearly between the US and Russia. And no matter how much Russia has helped us in the past, I'm leaving all that aside, and how many crimes the US has committed, let's keep all those aside. Today, the US is far more important for us than Russia is. And if we are in a situation where Russia's defense supplies get disrupted, as they will, they were disrupted in the 1990s when the Soviet Union collapsed, and they will be disrupted now, we will be left isolated in the world as we were in the General Assembly. And then we will be dependent upon, we'll be looking around for defense supplies as we were floundering in the 1990s. So I don't think it is in our self-interest today to keep going for Russia. our policy of multi-alignment, which is to ride all the horses possible in the international field, it could have worked in an atmosphere where there was reasonable degree of international trust and friendship. Today, in the situation of war, that will not work. We'll have to choose sides and we'll have to get off the fence.
So you're saying we're in danger of burning both ends of the candle, Ambassador Sinha?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Okay, before I get Commodore Uday Bhaskar, if you want to briefly interject there, Ambassador Prakash, since it's a very, very different perspective from yours.
Well, Dilip is an astute diplomat. I respect his perspective. I have given mine, and that's how things are. I respect his perspective.
Okay, but obviously you have both agreed to disagree in a gentlemanly sort of way. However, the three abstentions, the thing is that India is caught between a rock and a hard place. This is what one diplomat called a set of cruel dilemmas. There is no good choice, some would argue. Commodore Uday Bhaskar, go ahead.
In the current situation, Barkha, as you have outlined it in your opening remarks and what the other panelists have said, it is a rock and a hard place. And while we deplore what Russia has done, and I think we're all agreed that this is invasion, this is aggression, and what we are seeing is very, very tragic. But as an analyst, I think the Indian call is prudent. Is it something that is pragmatic given the various constraints that India has? I would say yes. When we look at the Ukraine crisis, there are many boxes. And I'm sure that as we go into the next week and perhaps the next month, we will have a better appreciation of some of the triggers and the catalysts as to why we are where we are. But for now, we are talking about India and its vote at the United Nations, 2 in the Security Council, 1 in the General Assembly. I think all factors being considered, and some of them have already been addressed by the other panelists, I use the word prudent again, given the complexities that India is dealing with, which are very, very multi-layered. And in the long term, one thought struck me when we heard the Russian foreign minister making reference to nuclear weapons, that for India, I think, as a voice to be heard at a time of a global crisis of this nature, having some kind of a link with the Russian leadership and being able to reach out to them, communicate with President Putin, as we gather Prime Minister Modi has done, also I think has a certain relevance at this point in time. So you could have an alternate scenario where India would have, on moral grounds, going along with the US-led Western opinion, would have taken a very firm binary stand and say that we support the United States and the European Union and Ukraine in the current crisis. My sense is that we would have perhaps lost even the ability to communicate with Russia. Then the only major country with which Russia would have any kind of contact would be China. Now, if you were to game this and move a few steps ahead, we would be in a situation where, as I said, you could have another exigency where India may not have the option of getting any kind of consultation, let alone assistance, if push comes to shove, as far as India and China are concerned. So under the circumstances, we deplore the Russian action. I would have perhaps been happier, or at least, let's not use the word happier, this is not a happy situation. But if India had issued a statement where it could have conveyed what I would call as the anguish of many of its citizens and told the Russian leadership that what they are doing is something that is not acceptable, but yet, for reasons of history, pedigree, and the traditional relationship that Delhi has had with Moscow, which, by the way, is 100 years old, it precedes 1947, that we are not going to poke them in the eye in the United Nations Security Council. And that is why
we don't know. Well, maybe we've conveyed that privately.
Right?
Yeah,
Because
we could have. We may have. But here's the question to you, Tavleen, because you opened this program by saying this is Gandhi's country. Is that really how statecraft can be conducted on absolute principles? Some might accuse you of being a romantic when you say that, when you've got 18,000 Indian students in Ukraine, some of whom I've been interviewing over the past week, who are trapped at the front line of this war in towns that the Russians have taken over. If you antagonize the Russians, there's almost zero chance of bringing these kids home.
Well, we should definitely take the help of the Russians to bring them home if the Russians are offering their help. But look at I'm not being a romantic. I'm being completely pragmatic, actually, about India's self-interest. India's self-interest is no longer with being a kind of Russian submarine as we have been in the past. Now I'm no geopolitical expert. I don't claim to know as much as the other gentlemen on this panel. But one thing I will say is that, when you see that we sacrificed Tibet for China's friendship, we didn't really have China as a friend. The Russians haven't been such a good friend to us. We have been a good friend to them. We may not, they may have not voted against us or whatever, but the fact is they've been very bad with their supplies, and some of those supplies come from the Ukraine. So what are we talking about in terms of interest? What I'm saying is that India has a chance at the moment to show that it's a real player in the world and not the submarine of the Russians or the Americans. Why don't we just stand up for ourselves? The Russian people are against the war. And here we are, pussyfooting it. For what? What are we going to get from this? Another batch of second-rate military equipment? Really, let's be serious. I think we're too trapped in past, situations, in little ruts of the past. We are no longer only in the Russian camp. The new Cold War is yet to start. And if there is one, we have to be on the side of democracies.
Ambassador Prakash, before we come to the philosophical question, I have a practical one. If is sort of almost being soft on Putin, which we certainly were in our first response, when we did not even use, when I say we, I mean the MEA in this case, did not even use the word invasion. We used the word violence, if you remember the first statement from the foreign ministry. Surely by now that should have given us a safe passage into Russian-controlled territories in Ukraine to be able to bring our children back. I was speaking to a young girl who can't get out of a house, who has no food, who's in Sumy, and she said there are Russian checkpoints everywhere and she cannot get out. The embassy has told her to stay put inside. What is the purpose practically of having kind of sat on the fence if we can't even get our kids home?
Barkha, I completely disagree that we are sitting on the fence, and my understanding of foreign policy is very shallow, limited, superficial.
Come on, sir. Please don't embarrass. Please don't embarrass me. I just asked the questions.
No. Kindly allow me. I think in my very poor understanding that Russia has stood by us in times of difficulty and has been a friend who has rendered us assistance which no other country had rendered. Yet, it is a fact that you look at the past, but you don't get weighed down by past. Now, India having taken a certain stand does not mean that India has not conveyed what India wants to convey privately. There is no reason for India, at least till now, to go to the rooftops and shout and scream as to what her stand is. Even when there was a Russian invasion of Afghanistan, Mrs. Gandhi took a stand, which everybody knows. Now, as far as the Indian students is concerned, I don't think that what is happening in Ukraine is picnic. There are bullets flying, people are dying, missiles are being shot. Now, in these trying circumstances, what has India done? India has got out already 12,000 people, about 8,000 are there. India is using its equity and the relationship with all countries to coordinate. I think an exceptionally a successful effort is being made under very trying circumstances to get the students out. Situation is evolving every minute. I mean, we armchair generals can sit in our cozy comforts and decide what India should be doing, but I think the reality on ground is slightly different. And the kind of commitment that this government and previous governments, I was a spokesperson when we got our people out of Libya. I think every government is committed to the welfare of its citizens. India has shown an exceptional commitment, and I salute that commitment. It is very easy to look back in hindsight and say, oh, why was that advisory not issued? Unless you had a mole in the Kremlin and you knew what Putin was up to, you could have only made judgments in a situation, and according to the judgments that were made, advisories were issued. Last point, Barkha, 15th of February, the first time an advisory was issued, as far as I remember, encouraging the students to leave those who could. I'm not blaming anybody. If I were a student, I'd look around and say, gee, I mean, it is calm. What is the problem? My studies are at stake. So they did not. I mean, I would not have. Who would have thought that it will take a turn for the worse the way it did? So, I mean, it's very easy to find faults, but those who are on the line know what are they doing, and I think they're doing it very well.
Okay, Ambassador Sinha, you said the abstentions are baffling. Let's game this, as Commodore Uday Bhaskar said. If India had voted against Russia at the United Nations General Assembly, would we have still been in a position to get our children home? And I ask this because Putin is not necessarily known for following the codes of international conflict, which in fact need to enable basic humanitarian principles. But we do not know if Putin would have upheld those at all. So let's imagine that India had condemned Putin, India had voted against Russia. What would have happened to these thousands of students who are still there?
Different from what is happening today. The fact is that despite the fact that India abstained on that resolution, all the three resolutions, Russia has not done anything to help our students get out of Ukraine. Not a single student has come back to India through Moscow, although many of them are right on the border of Russia in Ukraine. They are all trying to trudge across all the way to the west, about 900 kilometers, to the Western countries, cross across into Poland, Hungary, or Romania to get back to India. So Putin has not raised a finger to help India on this factor. So if we are looking only as the government is right now at the welfare of the Indians, I don't think Putin has done his bit to help India out. And quite apart from the fact that he's bombing civilians out of existence in Ukraine, 1 million people have already fled from Ukraine. And I'm not even raising the matter of India speaking up for these refugees, as India had done, let us say, in the case of the Bangladesh war when Pakistani crackdown took place. And we had 10 million refugees from East Pakistan in India.
Can I interject there? There are many diplomats I've been speaking to who actually cite the Bangladesh example as an example of how a United Nations General Assembly vote was tilted against Indian interests when Bangladesh was born, and said that, it reminded us of a time when Bangladesh wouldn't have existed if everything was about seeing invasions in black and white. This is an argument one hears from Indian diplomats a lot these days.
That's true. We have a lot of cold warriors in our country who are stuck in 1971, but we should perhaps go back to 1962 when China attacked India and Russia didn't do anything at that time, and we were left completely isolated. And the only country that came to our help in 1962 was the United States of America, and Nehru wrote to Kennedy for help. So history has all kinds of examples, both good and bad, and one can put up any kind of example to support any kind of argument, which is why I didn't want to go into that issue of whether USA has been a good friend of India or Russia has been a good friend to India. We just look at our present interests today, given the fact that our relations with Russia are in any case in jeopardy, because Russia is in jeopardy, because the West is gunning for Putin. And the West has been gunning for Putin because of 2014 when he annexed Crimea. It has been gunning for Putin because Putin rebuilt Russia. America thought when the Soviet Union collapsed that Russia was going to be a puppet or a camp follower of the West. Putin has rebuilt Russia and made it into a self-reliant country, and America doesn't like that. These are the realities of international politics.
Yeah.
Putin has been able
Well,
to stand up to, yeah.
yeah. Sorry. No, I just wanted to take that to Commodore Uday Bhaskar, who also thinks that the Indian response has been prudent. Ambassador Sinha and Tavleen as well, from different perspectives, are arguing exactly the opposite. That forget sentimentalism, forget absolute principles. How is it in India's interest? Let's take the Quad for example. The Quad created as a formation to counter the rise of China. On the one hand, you have the Russians and the Chinese coming closer together. On the other hand, we're the only country in the Quad to not have taken a position, at least overtly, against Putin, Commodore.
That's true. I think India, in the past, we have said this, has been trying to evolve a kind of balance in terms of its relations with the major powers. And we are aware that during the Cold War decades, India did this reasonably well. I think if you recall that period, the United States, in the second phase of the Cold War, decided to partner with China. And that is when India entered the friendship treaty with the former Soviet Union. So that's one part of history. I think after the end of the Cold War, after 9/11, and more recently after Afghanistan, there is an awareness, my sense, in the Indian establishment that we have to see how best to further or balance our relationships with the major powers. And here we are talking about Washington and Moscow. Is there dismay within India about some of Russia's actions, not just about Ukraine, but even on other issues? For instance, their relationship with China. I'm sure when President Putin and President Xi Jinping had outlined that detailed document in Beijing, where they said at the Winter Olympic Games that the strategic cooperation has no limits, I'm sure the Indian mandarins and the political establishment would have been interpreting that very carefully. So the reason I use the word prudent, Barkha, is to say that at the moment, I think taking a binary or a black and white on any of these issues for India perhaps would have been a more costly option as we go ahead. You refer to the Quad. Now, Galwan is still festering. A few months from now, if you have a situation where on the ground, China were to increase whatever be the leverages that it has, what is going to be the Indian response? When I said gaming, my sense is that if Moscow were to completely disrupt all your supplies, which are in the pipeline, they're at different levels. I think we would have a very, very difficult situation in purely tactical terms when it comes to dealing with the Chinese. So I think India is trying very hard. It's not an easy kind of situation to be all things to all people. But then at a time when your primary interest, I would still maintain, is dealing with China tactically, dealing with China in a strategic sense for the long term, which is why we are part of the Quad. I think this, again, I repeat, is prudent, but we also are aware that as far as the students are concerned, I personally believe that maybe this could have been anticipated or dealt with in a different way. But then everything in hindsight. I mean, this is a war where, as Vishnu, my colleague, Ambassador Prakash, has pointed out, from the 15th to about the 23rd, I think there was a window when the wisest minds in the world believed that President Putin would not attack, that it would be brinkmanship, but he would not attack. I think everybody has been proved, I would say, is those who subscribe to that view. So that's where we are now. So I do not want to suggest that, at this point, India has made the wrong call. I don't think so.
Okay, let's actually get last comments. Tavleen, I'll start with you. I think Galwan is an instructive reminder. You hear a lot of conversation these days with those who are supporting India's response, that who stood with India when the Chinese came in and took our territory. That the same Americans today who are expressing disappointment with India may make the right noises, but have effectively never really stood with India. But I also agree with Ambassador Sinha. This isn't a historic argument. This is an argument about what suits India right now, what would keep India stronger and safer in the long run. And the fact is that every nation in many ways is left to fight its own battles.
Okay, did the Russians support us on Galvan? Have they ever said anything against China? Have they ever mentioned it even? So, what are we talking about here? And the Russians and the Chinese are closer together than they've ever been. So, for a start, let's start getting real about that. Where the students are concerned, I think the mistake was made by the Indian government, which some of the students that have been interviewed have themselves pointed out. They said, why, when the Americans and the British started pulling their citizens out, Why did the Indian government not tell us that it was serious then? So I think that the delay, and secondly, I totally agree with the gentleman who said, why are the Russians not helping us get the students out? Right? We're abstaining, we're doing anything to please Putin. And why do they not just say, okay, come across the border into Russia and we get you home? Why aren't they doing that?
Yeah. Ambassador Sinha, you've made that point. What would you have India do at this point?
Well, now it's too late to try and do anything about the students apart from being at the border of Ukraine and getting people out. I think we should appeal to President Putin to stop his bombing of Ukraine and to enforce a ceasefire so that civilians are able to leave. If Putin does not do that, then we will have a window open to us to change our stand.
Okay, Ambassador Prakash, you made the point that we've already shifted our stand. Do you see us changing our stand much more radically, at least in public gaze?
Well, I do not have a crystal ball, Barkha. It will all depend on how the things evolve. But let me make a couple of very brief comment. During the Galwan crisis, there was so much pressure brought on Russia by China not to supply weapons and ammunition. Russia did. So Russia is not Soviet Union, but it is still a power, and we have vital stakes involved. Now, if the argument is that we should drop them like a hot potato, no, I do not accept that. Last point, I'm again not pointing fingers, but just stating facts of how every country looks out for itself. We were requested by the US to send troops to Afghanistan. But to do what? To go against Al-Qaeda, to go against the Taliban. What about the Pakistani-based terrorists? No, that was not on the radar of the US. There is a $10 billion bounty on Hafiz Saeed. He roams free. Others are taken out. So again, each country to its own. It's very easy to say things, but then you have to look out for your interests, and India for once is doing that. That is the best way forward.
Okay, we leave it there. This is a complex situation. You have a Russian foreign minister talking about World War III and nuclear war. It's an extremely dangerous inflection point. I do take the point that India must be guided by our own self-interest. But at the moment, I think we're all focused on getting thousands of our own people out. And this is an evolving situation, changing by the minute. Thank you, Ambassador Prakash Sinha, Commodore Uday, Bhaskar, and Tavleen Singh. We'll have you back as this story shifts, and it's shifting every day, every hour. Thank you to our audience for watching. See you tomorrow. Goodbye. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.